Hello, everyone. So I think, this one is really after you signed for one CPQ software solution provider, you want to go with them. And until the system integration team comes on site, they typically go a number of weeks by. And I talk to 25 different CPQ solution providers on a regular basis, and they all tell me the same thing, that a lot of customers don't use it, could use the time much better so that they are more prepared. And this is what this presentation will be about, to talk about that. Before I go there, a quick introduction about myself. So this one you can see I have a little bit more grayer hair right now, but it's an older picture. So I've worked with configure price quote solutions since '96. Have worked with it on the IT and on the business side, have set up products myself in these tools. Was also on the merger and acquisition side with firms like IBM, HP, Juniper Networks, and PwC before I founded Novus CPQ. And Novus CPQ is really about helping customers select the right products, addressing issues that you have with an existing solution. And we're also doing some research and analysis work as well. So we have, for example, visualization reports if that's something that you want to use in a solution. Then let me go. Oh, and one thing I should have mentioned also before we go there is the accent is from Germany. So I came 20 years ago. I guess I forgot to go back, but I'm a US citizen now as well. So that's where the accent comes from. Okay, so let's start with this one thing which I see very frequently. I know a lot of customers don't like to talk about it, but the very important topic is the change management. And it's underestimated in a lot of cases. A lot of customers try to find some shortcuts around it, to assign junior people to do it only a little bit later, to not really focus on it. The challenge with it is always the same. Tools which are not adapted by the intended users don't bring you any benefits. So you have to think about that from the beginning. And there are a couple of things, and what you see over here, I go there in a minute, is what the tasks are of change management. So that's it's to minimize the resistance to organizational change. You usually get that better when you have senior stakeholders involved early on, right? So there needs to be someone who has good connections within the firm to the project sponsors who can help you get things through, make sure that you have the resources available to be successful, and so on, to build bridges for you, basically, right? So these are typically senior stakeholders, should really be involved early on. And to maximize the benefits, you obviously need to have that, because as I said, if you have the greatest tool in the world, nobody's using it, it's useless. And that also means you need to engage some key players, and that's over here where CPQ projects are a little bit different, because you have potentially so many different stakeholders. And everyone has a different idea on how that's supposed to work. So you have the sales team. They are looking at one thing. You have sales operations team. They look at something else. You have the product management team. They look at something. The marketing team, the legal team, the finance team, and the IT team. So everyone has different objectives. And what I see frequently is that a number of the teams I mentioned are not getting involved. But once the system goes into production, they need to get involved. So that's where you typically run then into issues where somebody says, hey, I was never asked about that. I'm not sure this is what I want. This is not what I can support. And then you have issues later. That's why it's important, especially early on, engage all these folks. Not everyone needs to be engaged equally, because some people are more involved, some less, right? So, but you should involve all of these early on, just to increase the acceptance of the tool and to make sure you have all the support that you need from the senior team to be successful. The next one is also something very basic. I still see it missed. That's why I mentioned it over here, is with the project management. So I still see there's lots and lots of talk with agile project management technologies. If you look at PMI, I think every other podcast they do is around something with agile and with Scrum or some other things. Yes, and most of the projects for CPQ tools are also done in an agile manner. So which means whoever is the project manager, that's assigned anyway, that's not a problem, but they should have some basic knowledge about this, and they should also have an understanding when you work with this vendor to install this tool, how can that collaboration work, right? So how do you work with them together? Because they probably have a hybrid methodology where you have a little bit waterfall, where you have a little bit agile, and it's good to understand with your system integrator, or if you have a smaller CPQ provider and they do the installation themselves, to have some understanding before they come on site how that typically works. It saves you time, because if you have 3, 5, 10 people on site and they don't know what to do, it's a little bit lost time. And the topic of the whole thing was, how do you prepare the implementation for a system integrator when they come on site? Make sure the first day on site is efficient. So you use the project methodology, you prepare a product backlog and project plan, and I have to make one comment here, which is probably familiar to most of you. What I see still frequently is there's a lot of business requirements. There can be 1,500, 2,000, no lack of that. 80% of them are ranked high. It's this is not helpful, right? So nobody really made some tough decisions there. You need to do that. Otherwise, you will pay someone else to sit by your side and wait until somebody comes up with a decision, because you have to make a decision one way or another. So it's better to make it earlier yourself without paying someone else sitting there waiting for you. And that's also true for user stories. So what I see is very often, so you have like one sentence, as a ABC user, I have to, and then this. This is so easy. Sometimes you have a feeling people get bored in the afternoon, and for 1 hour, they just write one sentence after the other. So somebody, and that is fine. The question is, how do you make sense of this afterwards? If you ask 50 people to do that, you will end up with a lot of requirements. And somebody needs to do that, and you should do that yourself before somebody else comes on site and tries to implement the solution. Agree on practice to work with remote teams. I've been working with remote teams now for 15 years, right? So, and I think a lot of people are familiar with it. Just a quick note over here. A lot of these implementations will be done with an initial visit on site, and then you will work remote. So in this case, it makes sense to come up with some practices like the agile practice, where you say, okay, we have one meeting, a stand-up meeting, 15 minutes. What did you do yesterday? What are you planning to do tomorrow? What issues are you running into, right? So you need to have some regular feedback, and you need to have that across a number of teams. So that's also something the system integrator won't help you with. Is something a customer needs to do themselves. And how the project success will be measured, I guess also fairly common. I still don't see it done, is you have some major issues that you want to address. That's the reason why the CPQ solution was selected. You may measure this 50 different ways, but that's not how you would measure success. There will be some key measures we can say, did this improve? So my quotes are always too late. My competition is issuing the quotes before me, and I issue them too late, right? So maybe that's the measure. So, but I would suggest seriously everyone to have a couple of these measures that you know ahead of time, where you can see, does that work or does it not work? Because you will not implement everything in one go. You probably have a couple of phases, and you get more buy-in if you achieve some of these key points. So I think I go to the next one then. The next one, which is, again, some homework for every CPQ customer, is to find out what data you use and how the data flows, right? So, and there are 3 key data points here that everyone needs as a customer data, because just think about it. You go in your CRM system, you build an opportunity. At that point, you may not even know exactly what products are you looking for. You know the product group, you know the customer told you they want to buy for $500,000, but you don't know exactly what products, right? So then you go ahead, but you have the customer data, you know for which customer you want to do that. So in this case, the question is, so where's the CRM data coming from? Is that the same as it is in your order management system or your enterprise resource planning system? Are there any differences? You may have simple stuff like, hey, in my CRM system, the customer master field is 20 characters long. In my ERP system, it's 30, right? So if you move data back and forth, maybe you have some simple cutoffs like that, right? And so you should map this high level. And one thing I should also mention here, I mentioned a lot of things, I know that, but I think the key is not to do all these things before your system integrator comes on site. Is more to say, you do enough that you can provide them guidance and you stay one step ahead of them, right? So, and these are a couple of the things. You will not be able before the system integrator comes on site. But you give them enough that they can work on, that they can be efficient, start working on things, and the rest you just stay one step ahead of them, right? So not everything needs to be done at once. So customer master data is one thing. Find out how it flows, from which system it comes, and how it's used. Then the master data is, again, when I go back to the opportunity I mentioned earlier, so you have an opportunity, I know it's $500,000 for this customer. Now the customer tells me a little bit more. I have an idea now which product I want. I want to have a quote for that, right? Give me a high-level quote for 3 different products. So then I need to have the material master data, because now I have products that I'm configuring, so how is this data flowing? And you have the same idea again as with the customer master data. Then third is the pricing data, and that is, so you will have a pricing logic. Lots of companies still have, at the pros event I probably shouldn't say that, so, but you have just cost plus or list less, and you have a ton of different pricing strategies that you may want to use, right? So, but aside from that, you have probably already records somewhere. Most companies have that in the order management system. You have an SAP system. You have pricing records in there. You have pricing procedures. You have your own logic. The question then is, how do I use this data in a CPQ system? Do I call this ERP system, get the price from there? Can they handle the load when I ask for, especially when I ask for large quotes? There are some vendors who download this logic so that you have it in a local knowledge base. There are some where you duplicate the logic, where you have the logic in ERP and you have the same logic in CPQ, which is not good because then you have the double maintenance and stuff like that. But especially for these 3 data types, you should already investigate a little bit earlier, find out what the data flow is and how you want to handle this, especially with the pricing, right? So, and there's many different flavors, many different concerns, so it makes sense to have a look at this. And this is something I would say you need to know that to have a good discussion with your system integrator. It's not something you will solve by yourself, but it's something where you already need to think, what impact does it have? Which people need to be involved in these discussions? What concerns do they have, right? So that you can prepare a better discussion and you get to it faster. That's the idea. The next one over here is, it's not about the payroll. That's a nice picture I found. That's why I added it. It's about the business process flow. So you see there are many different flavors of this. You may have, a couple of years ago, I think, especially the large consulting firms were doing up to 6 different levels of these flows. Who is doing what at what level? This is not about that. The idea is you have thought about the processes, you looked at it, you use it to identify real issues because you want to fix an issue. That's why you bought the software in the first place. So, and you should have an idea what the current process is, and you should have an idea what are you trying to achieve with this? Where is the process? Where does it need to change? You cannot just take what you have today and then move this to another system. That would be a waste of money. Then you should stay with your old system. So, but if you do that, you have to do a little bit of homework. And stuff I mean here is, so you're selling in the US. The selling in the US is always similar, so you document that. You're selling in Europe, they do it a little bit differently. They have their own systems. You do it in Japan, they may have their, again, other processes and systems. So you document this, that you can have a better discussion on what needs to happen for that specific market, for that specific audience to do, and you keep it simple. So I would not suggest to go there and do this multiple levels deep and get into all the details because that's potentially a lot of wasted time. What it helps mostly with is to clear your mind, to put enough work in to document it so that you can have a good discussion with someone about it, and also to see where does it need to change. And you will need to have a discussion about this change, right? So that's why I mentioned the change management early, because, oh, this process is not working. Now, how do I tell you that this is not working? Why is it not working? Why do I propose something else? Do the stakeholders agree that what I'm proposing makes sense, right? So in order to have a better discussion, you do that over here. And I put a couple of processes here. I always see it's typically someone within the customer, on the customer side, who's doing this documentation, doing it high level, and then you have a review with it and have a better discussion. The next one is the business requirements or the user stories. Again, what I mentioned earlier is don't have too many business requirements, right? So, and you also have to look at sometimes you have business requirements which only apply to 10% of the cases. Yes, they cause an issue if it happens. You may not be able to fix them with the first release, so there's really no point in focusing on this in this first release, right? So if it's not really necessary, so sometimes it is. But I see like cases where you could say, yes, it is a problem, and yes, we will not fix it, but it's also accepting the fact you will not fix everything in this first release, so you have to make some priorities. So what are your priorities? And I think it's better to have a discussion, a tougher discussion earlier than waiting too long and then just learn afterwards that you cannot do it all anyway, right? So that's the point. And important thing I mentioned before is also that the stakeholders are really engaged. So I just want to re-emphasize this. There are a number of stakeholders, especially legal, finance, marketing are some teams that are being left out of the loop, right? So like, for example, think about marketing as for your internal sales reps, you don't need a lot of documentation. When they come on site, you do a training with them. They go through a couple of hours when they onboard, know the product, and they won't get much help. If they need help, they call someone on the admin side and they tell them, right? So when you have different customers, like a channel partner who's using your tool only once a month, they need much more help. And they will not always know the phone number to call. So in this case, maybe you have a chat capability in your configurator, or maybe you need to have some images or a document or a little video that explains dependencies, right? So, and it's important here to get all these business requirements, prioritize them, and make sure that you involve everyone so that you don't get any surprises later. So then a couple of things that you should know. I think that's the stay curious, learn a little bit about it in the beginning. 3 phases, so we talk about CPQ, so we will have the product configurator here. We will have the same about pricing and quoting. The first thing is you should learn a little bit what is a product configurator, what are product models, and what are best practices. And when I do that, how do I document this in the system, right? So give you an example is when you're selling different computers. In this case is, okay, so you're selling the computers. How do you want to sell them so that you have the same experience no matter if your sales team sells them or if your channel partners sell them, right? So you need to set this up in a certain way. So I only, with 1 or 2 clicks, I want to go everywhere. How do I do that? What policies do we want to follow? How do we want to call these things so that you're not building yourself a nightmare because different people set this up all differently, right? So you need to have some ideas in place. And again, this is something where you would not go ahead and have the answer before your system integrator comes on site. Is what you're doing here is you're thinking about your products, how you want to present them, and how do you want to talk with your system integrator about it. And you want to have some answers. Hey, this is how I want to build it. You tell me best practice because you have done this for 15 customers before or 500, right? And also you tell me how you want to document this, because if someone leaves who maintained this stuff, I don't want to sit there tomorrow not knowing what to do or have to hire an outside consultant to do that. So I want to have some ideas on how that is documented. Then I gather some data over here where I would say, okay, I talk to the product engineering team, product management team, they tell me what are rules. So if I select product A, I also get product B, right? Or if I select 2 of product B, I also have to add product C and D, stuff like that, right? So where you have the engineering rules, that's something you can do. It's very time consuming. And it needs to be implemented in the system, but instead of having this as tribal knowledge, it's good to document this because you need to have it in your system afterwards anyway. And you don't need a system integrator to do that because you probably know which people have that information. You can gather it, document it, and then you have a faster, better discussion with the system integrator. You also discuss the business process impact of this stuff is like when you have new product introductions. That's what the NPI stands for. So I'm adding a new product. So this new product means I need to have this new product also in this product model. So who is impacted? How fast do I need this to show up? Does it need to show up in all the markets? Stuff like that, right? So that's where you gather the data, and you document if there are any role-based tasks that are required. So this is really business analysis work ahead of time for the system integrator that you want to be able to give them in hand and then have a discussion with them. And then also one thing I want to mention here, and I do that for all three parts, is the user experience. Lots of vendors talk about it right now. The user experience is, should be so that your users actually want to use the tools, that it's better, that it's easier, simpler, right? And while again, you don't need to find a solution here, you have the system integrator for that, but you need to guide them a little bit on what that means. If you tell someone, okay, it's always fine if they have to click 20 times, then I cannot expect that somebody who pays a lot of attention when they build up the product model. Then they will just do that. So if I tell them, hey, I never want the user to have more than 5 clicks, I may organize this differently. So this user experience is kind of important to show what you have generally in mind. Not the solution itself, but just the direction where you want to go. Same thing for pricing. So you have, I see right now, up until now, when you look historically at CPQ tools, they came from product configuration. So it was mostly about getting the right products, not necessarily doing something fancy with the price, but it was more, I get the product. Sure, I have an order management system. I want to use that too. But the idea is to have the configuration right. So now that's changing. A lot of things are getting tacked onto CPQ solutions. And one thing I see increasing also is the need for different pricing strategies than just cost plus and list less. And this is something where you also want to think about what do you want to do over here? Which pricing strategies do you have? How do you typically handle this? So, and who needs to change it? I don't want to have someone coming on site setting up something great for me, and every time this changes, I need to have someone else coming in, right? So I need to go to ahead of time. I want to see how that works, who needs to be involved, and if necessary, you want to sit someone on the side of the system integrator so that they learn how that works. At least they can potentially do some part of this. Where the current price data is, I already mentioned that, and the price information will be shown to a user. That's something you probably have realized when you work with some configurators. Sometimes you configure the product. You may see a total price, but you may not see the price on the different components, right? So, and there are different flavors. So you could have a default component, and then I show you a delta price. If you select this option, it's that much less or that much more. And it's good to identify to them ahead of time when you want to do that. You want to see this pricing information while you configure. What does it really mean? Does the system have enough performance to do that? And so on. You gather the data, that's the applicable price logic. So if you have an order management system, for example, you probably have a bunch of different pricing logic. So I have my list price, then I want to have a margin of 25%, and I have this and this and this cost, right? So this logic, how you currently calculate the price, something you should have, and you should have it for the different cases, potentially different regions. In the simplest case, it is just the Excel spreadsheet that you use right now that you want to change, and you see how did you calculate the price so far. If that was working fine, great. In most cases, it will not, so you want to improve it, right? So then to what do you want to improve it? How is that supposed to work? Is that for all the product, just for certain product groups, just for certain regions, and so on? So whatever you know, you want to do that ahead of time. And again, you document anything that's role-based specific. Maybe what's common as with sales reps, they are not allowed to see the cost, but the manager is allowed to see the cost, right? So if they gave a discount which was not approved, the manager needs to see it, then I know, okay, the manager can see the cost and the reps cannot, right? So, and if you have stuff like that, it's also good to document this. And same thing, user experience I already mentioned. When are you showing the price? I let you configure the product, show you the price afterwards. I know in a lot of cases, as a consumer, the price impacts what I'm selecting. So, and I should tell you that ahead of time, so to see where you expect to see what. Then we have the quoting. The quoting is also So what's related to this, and I have a separate slide for that, is the approval workflows. So there are different workflows, obviously. So you could have sequentially at first. If you want to give a discount greater than 20%, it goes first to person A, and then it goes to person B, and so on, right? So it goes through a chain of different people, or it goes in parallel to 5 different people. And if the first 3 approved it, then it goes through. There are different flavors to it. In general, I think it's good just to find out first, what are you doing right now? Where do you have challenges? What needs to be improved? Again, never take what you have right now and just slam it into a new system. You also want to see when you have this quoting, so what has become much more popular over the last 5 years, I'd say, is that you have different marketing collateral attached to it. So I'm preparing a quote, I have 50 products, and for some of these products, I have some marketing materials that explain the products in a little bit more detail, that maybe point to a website, that give you additional downloadable material, stuff like that. So which material do you want to attach? Is that the same for every customer? Is that different per region? Because you will have different localizations if you work in multiple countries. You will have potentially the need to rearrange things. You may have the need to change terms and conditions if you do that, right? So you may have template documents that need to be changed, then need to be approved by someone else. So you should learn about this quoting process. Oh, and one thing which becomes more popular is now, so far the quotes have mostly been sent via email, or you may have sent out PDFs via email, right? And but what's more interesting right now in the time of data is I can send the quote to a website, and then on the website I can do all the analytics that I can do on a website, so I know more where did the customer click first. So instead of the end of the quarter sitting there waiting, saying, oh, did they open this? Did they look at this, right? So in this case, you can go to the analytics tool and can already see what did they open, where did they look, where do they stand, right? So you have more intelligence about it. And to just understand, so what do you need here for this quoting process? What approval process do you have? Which ones do you want to improve? What quote forms you want to use? And do you need these capabilities that I just mentioned with the website and stuff like that? And determine again what the user experience here is. Also, you want to have them sign the quote electronically and so on, right? So how do you notify the users, and how does that look on different devices? Is that always the same? Is it different depending on the device that you use? And the user experience is, again, is how you want the system to work. It's not to find the solution for the system integrator. They will guide you to what they think works the best, but as long as you don't know what you want, I can sell you anything, right? So in this case, it's good to think a little bit about it ahead of time so that you just know more and be better prepared. So for the workflow, I had a separate slide here just to say what approvals are required. You need them for different purposes, right? So you have approvals for products. Oh, is this customer allowed to get this product? Is this customer allowed to get this price? If they get this price, who needs to approve that price? And same with the terms and conditions and stuff. So determine, document this, and also what workflow will be used. Typically, what you do is you have first a sales team that's using the tool. It's simpler. They are your internal team. You have the full control. Channel partners would come next, but you have less control, right? So these are external people, and they have different processes. They may want to upload their own quote forms. They may want to upload their own prices, and so on, so it makes it a little bit trickier. And then e-commerce is yet another channel where you would say you have, it's a different experience, and in this case, you would have less workflow, because I don't want you to go on a website, shop for something, and then I show you a message, hey, this needs to be approved by person A, right? So it's important to go by route to market, see what you want to approve and what you want to approve for, products, prices, terms and conditions, and then also have some standard stuff in there as like when you have these approvals in there, who is a backup approver, all stuff you can find out yourself, document yourself, and hand it to your system integrator. And then notifications for missing approvals. So you sent out the quote, the customer didn't respond within 48 hours as expected. Now what do you do, right? So that's probably something that you can standardize. You have if somebody starts editing already approved quotes and stuff like this, what needs to happen. So this is something to think about, again, before the system integrator comes on site. Another very important piece is the integration with third parties, and there are a couple of marketing terms out there, so you probably hear a lot talked about REST APIs, right? So how is the data exchange between these different systems? And while you will not find the answer yourself here, again, similar to what I said before, is you can already put in some work to define how you want this data to flow. So where is your best quality data, and how is that supposed to be interchanged? Because the CPQ system sits right in the middle, and it will work with this data, and therefore it needs to flow. A lot of the vendors look especially to these two systems. Now with Calidus acquisition of, or the SAP acquisition of Calidus, they probably look more at this one. But for you as a company, it's important, you need to have the whole thing in mind, right? So in this case, it's important to understand in general what are the expected data flows, the stuff we discussed earlier, customer, products, prices, understand potential conversion requirements. If it goes from one system to another, what does it need to do? Also for you, who are the right stakeholders? So when you have a discussion with the system integrator about this, who is talking about this? Who is making the decisions? And also, like simple stuff like here, the data information is required to issue an order. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of things that don't want to go to each and every one. You could have credit checks. You could say, hey, every order that's created needs to match a quote 100%, or maybe 90%, but then somebody else needs to check the price, right? So when you integrate these systems, you need to have an understanding on how you want that to work from a business flow perspective. Not the solution for it, but you want to know who is talking about this from the customer side, and what's the vision here? Is that approved? So, and if you do that before the system integrator comes on site, you're saving some time. Last but not least, you have reportings and analytics where you probably have requirements that you want to discuss ahead of time. Is where do you need the reporting? You need it while you're in the tool, or you want to have the reporting afterwards where you have a certain section where you go and just see like a dashboard kind of information, right? Or do you need to see it when you're within the tool? Who needs to have access to these reports, right? So it's again, so you have a rough outline of what you want your system integrator to implement. And exactly, so the thing here is, again, I just want to emphasize this at the end of the presentation, right, is not for you to find all these things out ahead of time, because as I mentioned, you saw that was a lot of stuff. A couple of things are quickly discussed, but to really have that fully fleshed out can take considerable time. So in this case, it's really important to say, you get this started, you start with the most important things, you do that ahead of time, and the idea is you stay one step ahead of the system integrator, you know what you want, and you can guide them in the right direction. So that's the idea. So now I talked quite a bit. Yeah. Let me see if there are any questions.
I have one question for you on this.
Yeah.
And as it relates to the partners that you're choosing on these integrations, what are some of your best practice recommendations on selection of these partners?
So for the partners, always what I tell most of my customers, right, is to say, you should make sure whoever your CPQ solution provider is, they should have a good relationship with the system integrator. They should have a couple of reference customers that they could show you and that do something similar to what you do, right? So it's, if you're in the manufacturing industry, it's nice to have a reference customers in high tech, but potentially it's different, right? So it would be good to have that, and also to really work with them on something like this where you have a handover plan, right? So where you could say now you work with your CPQ solution provider, pros in this case, that yes, I want to have this product, you sign on the deal, and now you want to have someone where you can say, hey, this 4 or 6 weeks down the road before we start, we have some kind of handoff, right? So to say we're working on some of these things, you give them to your system integrator, and they use it, and they've done it before and have proof of it, right? So that's the if you want the best practices. Yep. What I see most often is really unfortunately the change management piece, because you have the leadership team agreeing to too much. So you have very high goals in the beginning. You want to do everything. You want to do it super fast. Then it's maybe you get the organization to do it. Maybe not. It will be tough for people. And even though everyone's saying they like change, in this case, if you have to live through it and it goes on for a year or two, it's challenging, right? So I need to really have you buy in, and you need to have some successes in between. And if you don't make some tough decisions in the beginning where you prioritize so that you have some successes, then it's getting very frustrating, because it feels like you're fighting against this wave and it's always getting bigger. And as long as you don't get anything out of it, it's frustrating, right? So I think that's the key, and it's a very simple thing, right? So, but it's something where I think you really need to be dedicated and say, don't underestimate this. I would prefer to have less functionality every 3 months delivered, and a good way of getting this to my users, instead of saying, hey, we do everything, right? So we're not doing first sales and then channel and then e-commerce. We do it all at once. It's too much. I see now a lot of CPQ implementations that have failed. They are trying to install their second, third, or fourth CPQ tool, and the problem is the team gets tired, right? So, I mean, you can hire new people, then it's a little bit less, but for most organizations, you have to keep a good amount of these people, and it's getting harder each and every time to sell them on an objective like that. Because, oh, we did that before and it didn't work. Why should it work now? And as long as you don't do anything different, you cannot expect different results. Anything else? Okay, then thank you very much. And if anyone has any questions, just let me know. Always happy to answer. Oh, a couple of things I should mention, maybe, since I heard that I do a podcast on CPQ, right? So where we talk to many different researchers, CPQ solution providers, and system integrators, as well as some customers going forward. And that maybe may give you some ideas as well, right? So that's always free. So if you're interested, it's a CPQ podcast. Okay, thank you very much.